the thing is, Art, that is that we do have a similar take in the end. So, how could this Occam's razor not apply? And it must be that you think that I am positing implicitly some belief in this metaphysical nature, and I think I've described pretty well. I mean, the most direct thing, and it's not absolutely direct, but the most direct thing is I'm having experiences. But even that is difficult because am I having them? Am I generating them? What does I mean? The idea that mental phenomena, that a dream or a memory or something is direct. I mean, how is that apparent anymore? I mean, I could understand how historically it might have been, but to us, that's direct. The when we know that there is the unconscious, right, and there's the non-conscious. Now, the fact of the matter is, there probably are truths that we are drawn to by the very construction of our brain in the material reality. But I doubt that. You say, well, but it's an example of nature. Yes, but nature has many ways that we can even conceive of a cognitive creature being constructed. You know, so in what sense would that mean we had a fundamental understanding of something beyond or something in its fundament? This is just one way. There can be alternatives. And if we find something that seems like it has to be true because of a language we've invented implies that, or really any other reason, we ought to take that as a paradox against the fact that we know everything must be relative because of our material nature. So, we're taking a leap of saying, yes, look, I believe that the apparent material nature of the mind means that I should treat it as it really is material in nature. And then that means that I expect relative understanding. At the very best, relative to that structure, that physical structure, and the way it is built. To perceive a particular number of dimensions and things like this, these particulars. Okay, so it's at very least relative to that. So why posit something beyond that? What is the purpose? Where does that go? Unless you can demonstrate that I'm doing it implicitly, which I endeavor to point out that I'm not. I'm accepting things as apparent, and this, I believe, is a function of my structure. Would all thinking material beings have to accept things as apparent? I don't know. I'm a human. I know that I do. I can deduce from the similarity between my brain and mammals that all mammals have to. And I can similarly extend that out to all living things as we understand living things. And as so far as I can think, well, what about minds of pure energy? Well, they would all be physical. They would all take time. But could there be something timeless? Well, perhaps a photon is timeless. Well, how does it think? I don't know. I don't have access to that frame of reference. The physics are so strange, there is no intuition to really help me do that. But it even appears, from what I do know, that even that is relative. The emission of the photon seems relative to the absorber. The two-slit experiment shows that. Where the thing appears is relative. Even something as material as that is still relative. So the appearance of the principles of relativity asserting themselves where we didn't necessarily have reason to expect them to assert themselves should strengthen our belief that cognitively, yes, we can and should look at these things in terms of relativity, and that we actually have no definition available. You can only mention metaphysics if you assume the world is a certain way and that there's some other world that isn't that way. But if all the world is us perceiving, and that's all we know of the world, then anything we perceive as spiritual truth or any of those things are by definition physical. So, by definition, because I've named perception in the first place, and then named some of the material facts, those which correlate and correspond in a certain way with other perceptions, I arrive at the idea that all of these things would be physical. And I would be seeking what the mechanics were of its influence on the mind and the mind's influence on it. And because the definition of physical and material has to do with that very interrelation, Demonstrating in a relation would be demonstrating some physical property. You know, we might be wrong thinking that therefore it would have to take energy, therefore it would have to take time. But that also seems to be the case, that it would have to take time. But then again, back to this, one of the biggest sources of this error for people that, yeah, have a basic interaction with the world around them that's somewhat skeptical but don't want to take a skeptical epistemological approach to what they know, seems, heavily rooted in this idea that, well, at least in the mind you can know something directly. I mean, in my case, I am basically saying the thing I know most directly is that there are perceptions, and I deduce things from the perceptions. But I don't say it's absolutely direct, because it's not. There's all kinds of indirections. But how can we, even in a human way, forgetting that we need to look at the mind as a bunch of neurons and that millions of neurons signaling is the very definition of indirect. Because we know about the unconscious mind. These are parts of the mind which can be conscious if you focus on them, but which we know that at many times are going on and not in a conscious way. And we know that there's the non-conscious, the built-in things of the brain. You know, the frequency of brain waves, the fact we have two eyes, not one or none, that we don't have an eye for ultraviolet light. You know, we know there's all these limitations, and yet why would we seek to have this foundation? I mean, we're all floating in an ocean of perceptions, and there is the desire, indeed the need, to get a footing on something. But what we have to be accepting of is the fact that we need to build, we're floating around with a bunch of wood and stuff, and we need to build a raft. And when we get on that raft, it'll still be wobbly. And when we build the raft so big that our motions don't wobble it, we can still deduce that no, actually it is wobbling just a little bit. There is still give everywhere in the universe. And so that's my presentation to you. And I don't really expect agreement in general, but if I did, it would be a hope to find agreement with you, because the results of our thoughts are so similar that it leads us to this question of why are you proposing things, or at least me to this question of why are you proposing things that to me don't seem necessary, and which involve the willing acceptance of things which to us are apparently false in every case that we can actually make tangible, that we can actually study. This assumption that there has to be something direct in it, when in reality our very consciousness is just a part of the mind. This shows that it's not a feature just of any old mind, that thinking can go on, separate from our consciousness. And maybe it's conscious in its own right. Maybe our brains have more than one consciousness and we perceive one. But all of this argues to that there's parts, that there's a communication. There is no I'm one atom and I perceive. To perceive appears to take whole systems of atoms. It requires complexity. So why say or hope or feel that you can reduce it to a simplicity? In fact, we have to doubt everything. Our memories, our feelings. It feels like love. Am I really in love? It feels like hunger. Do I really need food? But anyway, it is very fun talking to you, and I will repeat, as I have in the past, you were somebody on YouTube that made me realize that there was actual philosophical conversation going on YouTube. I very much applaud your thinking process, your intelligence, the productivity of your input, and the kinds of conversation that it inspires. And so that's all good. But I also believe all the more strongly that you, as somebody that does have this overlap that you identified with me, is somebody who can go to what I find is the next step, where you finally give up on the absolutes all the way through. It can be done. You can give up on the absolutes all the way down to perception, which you merely accept as the way things are. And are they that way for other people? I don't know. We can ask them. But I find that there's a similarity in those experiences. And I don't seek to take that similarity and say, that's an absolute, but rather to remember